All right, good evening. It is 7 o'clock and it's nice to see everybody this evening. I just want to check the agenda. Okay, so we're going to call the meeting to order here at 7 o'clock. Ms. Shope, could we have a roll call, please?
Anderson?
Here.
Levy?
Here.
Delgado? Delgado? Jacobs?
Here.
Miller?
Present.
Wong?
Here.
Delgado, can you hear me? So I have Miller and Wong in the boardroom and other members virtual. Delgado seems to be connected but has not responded.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Shope. May I please have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, at this time, I would like to welcome back to Dr. Keiser. We're glad to have you this evening, and if you want to go ahead and give your update on our reopening plan, we are all ears.
All right, thank you, and I am just going to share my screen here. And so I will present and then ask for questions at the end. So good evening. Tonight I'm just going to take some time to recap my previous presentations and share information about opening, closing, and reopening our schools and district. And then we'll conclude with the next steps, potential next steps past tonight, depending on the board's questions and ultimate decision. To begin, I just wanted to start where we started back in July with our priorities and let everyone know that the priorities that we outlined way back when have not changed. We are still looking at all of these areas and hope that I have again touched upon these over the past couple of presentations, and also aligned those presentations and our work on the plan to our goal, which has not changed. And that's to ensure a comprehensive learning environment that does prioritize our safety and well-being along with our academic success. At the end, the recommendation that I'm asking of the board and that I put into board docs for the board's consideration is to approve this reopening plan and shift to an in-person instructional cohort model starting on April 8th, 2021. And then in addition, grant the superintendent the authority to reopen the schools or district following a closure that results from either a localized outbreak or a staffing situation. So limiting to those two particular situations. As I mentioned, the cohort model is a model in which we are taking our population of our students and breaking them into two groups. The first group would attend schools in the first half of the week on Monday and Tuesday, and then do distance learning Thursday and Friday, and Group B or Cohort B would do the reverse. They would be in distance learning Monday and Tuesday, and then transition to in-person on Thursday and Friday. Wednesdays would still be a time for staff meetings, PLCs, grade level and department meetings, as well as professional learning. Students would use that time to do makeup work or do any work that may be assigned from Tuesday and be due on Thursday or whatnot. Our distance learning or concurrent learning model, again, fits within our ideals that we want our families to have this choice of in-person or continuing distance learning for term 4 if this is approved. A family handbook has been developed and will be sent to our families so that they can make an informed decision. We are currently having 100 copies printed, both in English and in Spanish, that will be sent out to each school. In the event that a plan is approved, we want to make sure that we are able to reach families both digitally as well as in print. I will lay out a timeline, our proposed timeline, at the end of this presentation so that if approved, families would know exactly what to expect as far as communications from the district for term 4. Again, in this learning model, families would have the choice. They can keep their students in distance learning for the remainder of the school year in term 4. Families could also choose to send some of their students or all of their students. It's truly a family choice. And I also want to dispel the misperception that this in-person model is an in-person model in which students would come and just sit in the classroom and be on their devices the full day. That is not the in-person model. When our in-person model is one where the students are engaged in their learning with their teachers and moving from class to class. There are some districts in our area that do have the model where the students would come and just sit in one classroom all day. That is not the model that we've developed here in the school district of Beloit. So I just want to make sure that the board and our community are aware that we are, when we mean in person, we mean truly in person. They are moving to specials in the elementary level, and they are going to their elective classes in intermediate and high school. As I mentioned in an earlier presentation, students will be being transported on the bus. Will need to follow our protocols, starting with completing a student COVID screener before leaving their home. This screener is available on the STB app. It's also on our website. It's going to be in multiple places so that families can fill that out before students are getting on the bus. All buses will be limited to 24 students. There will be assigned seating to make sure that we maintain that 6-foot distance, and buses will be cleaned between routes. All bus drivers and students will be wearing their masks during transportation to and from school. Students that are being dropped off or picked up, again, student screeners will need to be done. We do have our public Wi-Fi at each of the schools that is accessible within a half mile to a mile of the school. So if parents have a smartphone, they can fill out the student screener right there as they're driving up and waiting to drop off their kids. Students will be escorted into the building if they are being dropped off throughout the day, or students will be escorted out of the building if they need to be picked up throughout the day. To ensure that we prioritize our health and safety of our students and staff, our students will, again, have those COVID screeners done. We have videos that we have already uploaded to our website and that families can view. These are similar videos to what our staff had viewed at the beginning of the year around proper hygiene for hand washing, mask wearing, moving about schools, filling out screeners, and so forth. These will be, again, sent out so that our families and our students know the expectations coming into the building, and realize that even though we're coming in the building, it is not going to be the same experience as if it were pre-COVID times. The routines and so forth are going to be different, and we are going to be spending explicit time making sure that all of our students, whether they are new to the building or veterans of our buildings, know what's expected of them. And once they're at school, all of our staff and students are going to be expected to wear masks. The only times will be when we're eating, or for our youngest students during their nap times. Students will be assigned an entrance and escorted into the building by our staff. The student IDs will be scanned, and those are going to determine whether or not the screener was done. In the event that a screener was not done, the students will be escorted to another location, and our health room assistants and school nurses will be doing the screeners at the building and contacting families to ensure that they are indeed able to be in the school. In the event that they're not, they will be family contacts will be made so that students will be escorted out, so that students, if they show up into the classroom, we know that they've been through the screener and that they are cleared to be in the school that day. In our classrooms and hallways, again, to follow our health and safety protocols, our mitigation measures extend throughout our entire building. Again, we can't say this enough about our masks. Our social distancing protocols will be followed, and again, we are using the guidance that has been given to us by the Department of Health Services and our Rock County Health Departments, which is, again, about the 6 feet. I know that there's other information that's out there, but we are going with the information that has been given directly to us from our local health departments. The 3-sided plexiglass at tables so that we can both maintain those barriers, and we will have the hand sanitizer and approved wipes in all classrooms and available to be replenished on a daily basis. Our hallways and commons and restrooms, students will be limited. We won't have the situations where kids are just able to be excused to go from the classroom to bathrooms and so forth. Again, we want to make sure that we maintain our health and safety standards throughout the school day. Also mentioned in prior presentations, some of our schools will have the foods delivered to the classrooms, and these are schools that have had this as a practice in the past, so this is not a new procedure, but this is working within our safety protocols and trying to maintain as much of a normal school environment as we can during a pandemic. And the other schools who are normally in the cafeteria will be coming to the cafeteria. We will be serving our breakfast and lunches as we do normally. The difference will be that we will be delivering our foods in self-contained sealed bags because we cannot do the serving lines as we've done in the past, so that our food will be individually packaged and delivered to the students. And those packages will have sanitary wipes for students to clean up after eating their surfaces in their areas. We will again maintain, as we have all year, our grab-and-go meal service. We've been very fortunate that we've been able to maintain this, and we will continue to maintain this even if a plan is approved to go to in-person. So 7-day food packs will be available for pickup every Wednesday. That will be a change from our current practice of twice a week. However, for families that need smaller food deliveries, we still have our food service number that all families have to do is call that number and say, we can't handle a 7-day food pack. We need a 3-day pack or whatnot. This also supports our students who housing may be a challenge for them, stable housing, and can't necessarily have 7-day food packs because they might not be in that residence. So if any of those situations arise, we have ways to accommodate families and individuals. We will continue, as we have all year, to work with our partners to ensure that we are able to maintain the same level of service and support to our students and families when it comes to food, because we don't want that to be a barrier to learning. To summarize our cleaning protocols, we have a detailed 7-step protocol that I outlined that addresses every area of our school, from classrooms to bathrooms to kitchens to gymnasiums to break rooms and shared spaces. All of our products have been rated effective against COVID-19. We replenish our access to hand sanitizer, soaps, towels, toilet paper, and all that daily. And all of our custodial staff will be wearing gloves and masks at all times and working throughout the day to clean high-touch spaces. Again, guidance that has been given to us through our state and local health departments as the best way to mitigate any spread of COVID-19. To close out the summary of our health and safety protocols, again, we have our masks, we have our PPE or personal protective equipment distributed to buildings. We also have a supply that we have on hand at a central warehouse so that we can deploy those to buildings as needed and then be able to have weekly access to deliveries if we ever run short. The COVID screeners would be completed by, again, our staff and our students. And then if we had any visitors to the building, those would be essential visitors such as utility workers, fire marshals, health or safety personnel that would need to come to our buildings. We have a visitor screener in those events. And then, as I mentioned, our screeners are accessible by phone, computer, the SDB app. We have a QR code at all of our buildings, as well as our website. And if all of those happen to not work, we do have, as our backup, a paper option at each of the schools so that we can keep track. And again, this is so that we can contact trace in the event that we would need to close the school due to a localized outbreak. And again, just to mention that our Wi-Fi antennas that we put on the outside of each of our buildings last spring are still there and accessible by the public during the school days. In preparation for our concurrent learning, we've done a lot of PD for our staff to get them up to speed on what concurrent or simulcasting would look like. We want to make sure that we wrapped around staff multiple times. So this schedule here not only talked about the delivery of the equipment, but we have train-the-trainer models. So we have people who have had deep level training so that they can support within the building. Plus, we've been wrapping around at the district level with support, which will the last scheduled support training session is on Friday, March 12th. We will, at that point, have on-demand support. So if any individual or groups would like to reach out to any of their internal trainers or the district, Brandy and Brett, to do some additional training, they would be available to do on-demand training after the 12th. I also want to say that way back at the beginning of the school year, we did order 1,600 Chromebooks for our high school and Beloit virtual school students. Those have now come in and have been deployed so that for our high school students who have had issues with iPads and the battery life on them, those are being swapped out, so that will address many of those issues. We are also ordering for our remaining students who have iPads, backup power units with cables for each of our schools so that our students would be able to either run it off this power unit, this battery pack, or at least charge during this school day. So just want to make sure that we are covering all of our bases when it comes to addressing our learning environment, and we don't want the technology to be a barrier. So the question then left to be discussed is opening schools, how do we keep them open, and when, if needed, how do we close them? Our most recent guidance from the CDC, which was sent to us a week ago last Friday, really talked about guidance for opening schools. And it's reassuring and affirming that the planning that we've been doing here in Beloit aligns to that work. Their recommendations on the topics, on the specific topic of metrics is highlighted below. The CDC guidance on opening schools talks about it in terms of transmission level, low being blue and high being red. But the metrics that the CDC have been using actually don't align to the Rock County Health Department's metrics. So in the past, when I've been asked about metrics, I've been using the data from our local Rock County Health Department and started with positivity, 14-day positivity percentage, and then shifted to active cases per 10,000. And I established a line or a comment that the line should be at 120 active cases per 10,000 and below for considering reopening schools to in-person. If we are to use the CDC guidance, we would actually be having to switch to a 7-day average cases per 100,000. And you can find that measure by going to the Department of Health Services website or DHS website. And they have a statewide map of every school district that outlines that 7-day cases per 100,000. It also, on the DHS website, has the 7-day positivity average, which is the bottom row listed there. Breaking that CDC guidance up into the different cells, because otherwise it would be too small, the CDC says there are 5 key strategies that need to be in place in order for you to consider opening up to in-person, and that is mask requirements, physical or social distancing, hand washing, cleaning of the facilities, and the ability to contact, trace, and isolate and quarantine. As I mentioned, all of these things are things that we put in place, not only for our staff, but in the event that we were in person. And happy to say that all of these were put in place well before this guidance was issued by the CDC. So how does the CDC list their reopening in terms of the metrics that I just talked about? Based on the transmission rate in the blue and yellow categories, the schools could be opened in person fully as long as we maintain our physical distancing and those mitigation measures. What we are asking for as administration is what the CDC would call a hybrid model, or those things that you would see under orange and red. So by looking at the DHS, or the Department of Health Services website, as of this afternoon, the 7-day positivity rate per 100,000 is at 5. So that would put us in the lowest category, or in the blue category. But regardless, we are only asking for a cohort model, and we don't anticipate making any changes to that recommendation the entire term for, if approved. If we follow the protocols that I've outlined over the prior presentations and tonight, if we go to in-person, then we foresee no reason to actually close unless we have one of two situations that would arise. A localized outbreak, which, as we've learned throughout our experience in this pandemic, is determined by the Rock County Health Department through our contact tracing efforts, or if there is a staffing situation that would prevent us from being able to support our students because there isn't enough staff. And the reason that would be is because we aren't able to simply say, if a staff member is not in the building and we can't get a sub for them, that we can just simply take their students and move them to other classrooms. We have to find another sub for that classroom. So it's going to be different. We are going to be asking our staff to step up and fill in and sub for people that may not have necessarily been asked for before. But in the event that a principal realizes that they've got so many staff that are out that they won't be able to staff their building, they would reach out to the district and we would be making those calls. In either of those events, I would be communicating the closing of that school through our normal communication channels, both to the students and families as well as the board. In the event that either of those would happen, I am asking for the ability to reopen the school in those two events. If something were to close the school outside of those two events, we would follow our board-approved policy, and I would bring that situation to the board, and the board would make a determination about reopening outside of those two situations. So, in essence, this one plan talks about the metrics for opening, and once open, the way we stay open is we have to follow through on all of the protocols that I've laid out in prior presentations as well as summarized tonight. If we were to close following those protocols, the only foreseeable reasons would be the two that I've outlined. And if it were one of those two situations and the board felt it comfortable to give me the authority to reopen past those two situations, we would have a reopening plan. Outside of those, the only way the schools or the district would reopen is if I bring that issue to the board, and the board would make a decision from that standpoint. So, next steps moving forward. If we move to an in-person model, we would keep everyone looped in by creating a COVID dashboard that would be housed on our homepage. And it would talk about the cases by school through each specific time frame beginning on April 1st. And then it would also address, again, students who are quarantined based on the screener, and then if we have any active cases. So active cases would be positive COVID cases that were reported to us. We would also move very quickly into getting information out to our families and asking our families to make a decision around whether or not they want to send their students to school. making a decision tonight would put in place these following steps. Tomorrow morning, we would send out a skyward message to our families and ask them by student whether or not they would want to have them come to school in person or remain in distance learning. That will remain open, and our schools, our principals and staff in schools would be able to support that by following up and have that all closed out within a week and a half. So by Wednesday, March 10th, we would have families make that decision. Any families that hadn't made that decision, schools would continue to follow up through the remainder of that week. And then Wednesday the 24th and Thursday the 25th, we would have family webinars to talk about and answer any questions that families had about in-person instruction or distance learning, if that's what they chose to stay with. We would also be we would be moving our mindset to bringing before the board presentations around what our summer school planning. We've had some initial meetings already, and those continue in the background, but we would start to schedule presentations to the board around our plans for summer school. I will remind the board that as of yet, DPI still has not issued formal guidance around what summer school parameters or limitations there will be or not be for this school year. So us, like every other district, are still kind of planning in dual mode for in-person, distance, or a potential hybrid. And we are also focusing in on those things that we need to do now to set us up well for the start of the 21-22 school year. All of these things would be items that will be coming before the board after tonight, because that the time for us to bring those things forward is now, and we are actively planning for those pieces. So with that, I open it up for questions.
All right, thank you so much for that presentation. At this time, what I'd like to do, just to make sure everybody has a chance, I know I have a number of questions. I'd like it if we could just all go through and call your name, and if somebody super wants to start first, go ahead and throw your question mark in the box, and I'll go in that order. But I'd like to do one question or comment per board member, and then we'll loop it around until we're ready to take action. Is there anybody particularly who would like to start? Okay, otherwise then I'm going to go across my screen, and the people across my screen are board members Anderson, Levy, and then Vice President Wong in that order. So board member Anderson, would you like to start us off with questions or comments? One at a time, please.
I can do that for you. First off, I want to say thank you very much for giving us this presentation. So the first question I have for you is, have you guys already done any kind of kind of sending out those kind of surveys, kind of getting feelers of how many families we can expect that'd be interested in the cohort model, or are you waiting for us, or are you waiting for that initial approval to send out those surveys?
So the decision for doing in-person will create that skyward survey that would go out to all families, and all families would be required to send that back. Prior to that, all of our surveys have indicated that, and we haven't had 100% feedback. Not 100% of the families have answered the surveys, but of the families that answered the surveys, about 60% of them would say that they want to send their kids to school. About 5% say that they might send some of their kids to school, and the remainder of the families are saying absolutely distance learning, or they didn't have an opinion that they wanted to express.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Board Member Anderson. Board Member Levy?
All right, so my first question is related to screen time with the concurrent instruction model. So for students that are at home on a day that they're not scheduled to be in, or for students who choose distance learning, I'm concerned about them being on screen the entire day, because it's my understanding it would be similar to a traditional bell calendar or bell schedule. Has any thought been given, and this is just an idea, let's say you have an hour-long class, if the first 30 minutes is instruction, your distance students, your in-class students, and then the second 30 minutes is kind of independent working where you can check in with your teacher if you have a question. That, just off the top of my head, would cut the screen time down in half. Or are there other plans that you and your team have come up with to address the screen time issue?
That's a great question, Board Member Levy, and in part I've talked to my team and said that I may be calling on them to give some more details. So in a moment I'll be calling on Ms. Moratek to chime in a little bit more on the nuances that we've talked about with our distance learning. But the short answer to your question is yes, we have talked about addressing the screen time issue. In each of the models that I presented around Concurrent, it is about having some time for direct instruction and then some time where students are engaged both either offline or are able to engage in an asynchronous way, so they could limit the time that they're engaged directly on the screen. So Ms. Moratek, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the models and how it's addressing screen time?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm on my telephone versus my computer, so I apologize, or I'd show my screen too. Good evening, everyone. Teresa Moratek. So I love that question because it really gets at talking about best instructional practices and putting children at the center. And so when Dr. Keyser presented last time, he talked about those 3 potential models that we were using to get teachers familiar with different styles of teaching. So for example, one of those models is that rotation station kind of a model. So you can picture kids both at home and in the classroom at the same time, and the teacher saying, okay, right now you're at this station, you might be at home, so I want you to do, independent reading. Or you're at home and you're at the station where you're meeting with just me, and I'm going to have a meeting with you. Or I'm meeting with kids in front of me right now that are in the classroom, right? And that's often a very common practice, like, for example, during the literacy block, kids will rotate to stations or to centers and then rotate kind of like through the teacher. So that would be an example of that. Another example is the flipped classroom. And so in the flipped classroom model, there's that screen time perhaps where there's a direct instructional, maybe like a video that you're watching, and then it's opened up to discussion time. So where a child at home might be looking at a screen, they're part of a classroom discussion. So it's not, like a program driven or staring at a screen in that regard. Or the teacher could choose in that moment to have a classroom discussion with the kids that are there, and then the kids that are at home are doing something different. And then in that final model, it's really the most differentiated, and it's called a playlist or a menu. So built into that menu, a child can move through it, and part of that menu could be independent learning activities. And I envision in that model, and actually in all of them, on the days that the kids are there, they might be going home with materials that could be used and carried over in those days that they're at home. And we have been working with the principals at the administration meetings around how they're having conversations with teachers when they're planning for those classroom schedules. And so I hope that helps to kind of bring light to your question, because we certainly do want to promote that on and off time with screens.
It does. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Levy. Vice President Wong?
Well, I'm going to ask the mask question. You talked about it, we've referenced it several times in the presentation. And as far as the masks are mandatory for all staff and all students. And I guess the question that I have is, what are we going to do to make sure, how is this going to be enforced? What power and authority are you going to give administrators and staff to make sure that this doesn't become an issue in any classroom, in any building whatsoever? I mean, because all it's going to take is one individual that, oh, well, we'll let it go because it's Johnny and he has trouble with that, or the masks are too big because they're made for adults when we should have youth masks. So I guess that's my question, and is how are we going to make sure that it's followed by all?
Thank you, Vice President Wong. And I'll start off. And as far as the mask size, we do have both adult and youth masks on hand, so that if a student comes and the issue with the mask is that the mask's too big, we can remedy that most directly. We are going to take this from a pro-social approach, in that we are addressing the issue with the mindset of the student wants to be there, so we are driving to the students the expectations that if you want to be here, these are the things that need to be done. So if it's a case of a mask being too big and it keeps falling down, we can address that from a coaching standpoint. If a staff member sees a student doing something that is willful and deliberate against the expectations, we've told, and this has been asked by the administrators during admin meetings, they should be calling down to administration, and the administration has to determine, is this a willful act to violate that expectation? If that's the case, we know very clearly what the answer is that they do distance learning. They are moving to a distance learning model. They can't be in person if they're not going to help maintain the safety and expectations around that. If the situation, and again, I wish it were as a simple answer to say this is a one-time or a two-time. It has to be determined in the moment of the situation, that if it was a situation where the student went to the bathroom, got a drink of water, and walked out and didn't have the mask on, and that was the issue, and they might have that conversation, say, you didn't have your mask on, like, you need to have your mask on, and deal with it that way. But our answer is not to suspend a student if they are willfully disobeying that rule. Our answer to that question is, you're moving to a distance learning model, and that's where you're going to be 100% of the time, because you can't jeopardize the health and safety of our environment during this pandemic.
I guess a follow-up question to that is, and you kind of addressed it, but I guess I'm concerned because I can picture that that parent in the toy store saying, one more time, you get one more warning, and then we're not going to get it, and that's after about 4 or 5 of them. Mm-hmm. And to me, what are we going to do? I mean, how many warnings is going to be enough?
It's not a question of warnings. It's a question of why did the situation occur. So if it's a case that that a student was willful in intent, that's a whole different matter. If it was a situation that kid was having lunch, got up and started to walk away without putting on the mask, that's a different situation. And the people that are best able to address those situations are the administrators in the building at that time, and that's the conversation we've been having with the administrators and helping them think through those situations. So, yeah, to me, those are the two situations. It's not a question of you get a warning when you willfully take your mask off and say, I'm not wearing my mask. If you're not going to wear your masks, we have our answer for you.
Okay. I just think it's imperative that we hold true to this.
It is imperative that we hold true to this, and if people are not holding up to that, those are the conversations that, again, we start as close to the situation as possible. So if staff report to administration follows up on that, and they know very clearly in terms of this is a very easy decision if they feel that this is a situation in which it's willful disregard for the health and safety of others, because it is the student's education will continue in a distance learning format, and as opposed to being suspended where they're missing those minutes of instruction and learning altogether.
Okay, and then also I just add on just to make sure that we're also addressing this with parents, and the parents are fully aware of the consequences as well.
Yes, we talk about that in the family handbook.
Thank you very much, Vice President Wong. Board Member Jacobs, followed by Board Member Delgado.
Dr. Kiefer, I want to commend you and your team on a very thorough presentation. And at this time, I have no questions.
Thank you very much, Board Member Jacobs. Board Member Delgado.
Thank you, Dr. Kieser, and your team for the nice presentation you did today. Some of my questions have already been answered, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what would be the schedule for those that decide not to do in-person school. Like, the schedule is going to be changing. It's not going to be the same as we currently have right now. Is that correct? And can you give a little explanation of what that's going to look like for them, please?
Yes, that's a great question, Board Member Delgado. So in part, when Ms. Moratek was talking about the different models and talking about how the instruction is going to adjust between in-person and distance learning, if a student is in distance learning 100% of the time, so Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday, we have to address that situation as well. And so when Ms. Moratek was talking about in the event that materials are being picked up in school and then being worked on at home, we would have to be sending those materials out to each of the families. But as far as the addressing Board Member Levy's question around screen time, all of those factors still apply. It's just that they're not going to be ever in the school face-to-face with their teacher. They will be communicating to their teacher and any of their classmates if they're doing any sort of group work in a distance learning way. So their schedule is going to change, but we are still being mindful of how much time they're on the screen and when they're connecting onto their classes throughout the day and throughout that class period.
Okay, thank you for that response. I'm still not quite clear. Like right now, they're doing like 2 classes one day, 3 classes another day. So that's going to change, correct? I just want to make sure that our parents out there understand that the dynamic, the way that it's being done right now, it will change once we go into in person or offer that cohort model.
Correct. So if they would normally have a five period day, they would have those same 5 periods, as opposed to compressing those into a shorter amount of time, as some of our teachers are doing in a fully distance learning, because no one's coming in. They're going to have their students in front of them. So in the event that they have English from 8 to 9, they're going to be logging in to that English class, and when they are released from that instruction and they're able to do work on their own, they have to remember that their next class period is going to start at 9:05, and so they're going to have to log into their next period class. So yes, we do talk about in the family handbook that the concurrent model is going to be a change, and part of that is us communicating out to families exactly what that schedule is going to look like for the students.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Board Member Delgado. Many of my questions have also been answered. I do have a few, but I'll just stick to one. Could you provide an update for vaccinations for the teachers? I've heard a couple of people express this concern, both from teachers and the community members, so we could just get an update on what that situation is.
Thank you, Board President Miller. The questions in terms of vaccinations, and it is March 1st, so teachers are now in the eligible group, and I'm happy to say that Ms. Babilius has been working tirelessly with the Rock County Health Department and our health providers to secure appointments for the remaining staff that want to get that. I know that it's been challenging, the situation we found ourselves in, but I will let Ms. Babilius kind of talk a little bit more about some of the efforts and contacts that she's been making, and I know that she's had some of our staff scheduled for their first vaccinations, and I'll let her to speak more to how far along that process we're at. Ms. Babilius?
Yes, so we do have dates set. So we have some first responders going in this week, which would be staff on our MERT team. And then we have dates for next week, which would be on the 10th and the 12th. So all staff will be given the opportunity to be vaccinated at the latest on the 12th. So.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and thank you so much for that update. So with that, does that time out then where everybody will have had their second shot, an opportunity for their second shot by April 8th by chance?
Ms. Babilius?
So it is 28 days apart. So the 9th would be the second dose.
Okay, I really appreciate that information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go back around and see if there are other questions or comments from board members. Board Member Anderson, do you have additional questions or comments at this time?
So the other questions I had written down have actually been answered, so I have one last question. And that is if we are going to be closing the school down for the day. So if we start seeing, when would that call have to be made for when we would actually close the school down for the day due to staffing or any other kind of issues that would come up? Just because then it gives parents an idea of, hey, if I get a message by 6 o'clock, I know my kids aren't going to be going to the school today. They'll be staying home, or is there a certain time frame that you have already planned?
Absolutely, and so So even though you didn't ask specifically about the localized outbreaks are determined in conjunction with the Rock County Health Department. So Ms. Babilius, whenever we have a situation that arises, she works directly with the Rock County Health Department. They determine when a localized outbreak level has been reached, and then that sets a very clear timeline of that building is shut down for 14 days. In the event of staffing, we actually have protocols for staffing to report not coming into the building, and Ms. Williams or Ms. Armstrong, I'll tap on both of you to talk a little bit more about the details, but I believe the timeline is very similar to when we have to make the call for closing schools due to weather-related incidents. So, Ms. Williams, Ms. Armstrong?
Oh, thank you. This is Joanne Armstrong. Yes, we would be making those calls as staff are putting in their screeners before time. The encouragement, of course, is going to be the earlier you do it, the better we can plan for subs. And we're really going to have to continue to reiterate that process. As soon as we know we are beyond those limits, we would make that call, but it should be made before 6 a.m., which is the same time frame we have for inclement weather days. We always try to make that call by 5, but when you are facing situations where staff have not put in their screener results, that is where we could find ourselves in a later notification. But we would be making every effort and every possibility to fill those spots within our realm. We do not want to close the schools due to staffing, if at all possible.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Board Member Anderson. Board Member Levy, do you have additional questions or comments?
I do. I am assuming with the limited transportation, I believe you said 24 students per bus, that encouragement would be given to parents to self-transport, to drop their kids off. So with that in mind, is there going to be an effort to have siblings cohort together so parents are doing drop-off 2 days a week versus 4 days a week?
Absolutely. We are definitely building the cohort for families that, siblings and families that live at the same address going together on the same day. So even if they're in different buildings, they should all be coming in the same cohort.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. Vice President Wong, do you have additional questions or comments at this time?
Yeah, I do, but every time I get up here, I feel like somebody's already taken my previous one, as Board Member Levy just did. So thank you for that. But that's good. Question, I have a few others here. The monitoring of the bathroom, who's going to be responsible for that, and how is that going to be handled? I know sometimes at the high school that has been a little bit challenging, and I'd kind of be curious how that's going to be handled in this environment.
Absolutely. So this is one that, again, in talking with administrators and going with this whole new way, I'm gonna talk a little bit more with Ms. Armstrong and Ms. Moratek, who've been working directly with our principals. In part, it's going to be with our littles having escorts take them and trying to do that in concerted ways that we are not being ushers going back and forth. But as they get older, it becomes a little bit more challenging in terms of that. So the older students, they end up having situations in which they are going to go between passing times at the high school, and it's going to be a situation in which we're going to have to be diligent in staff monitoring the areas outside and saying, okay, like 3 people just went in, everyone else waits outside until one comes in, or one comes out, one more goes in, and it goes that way. Ms. Armstrong and Ms. Moratek, did I summarize that well?
Yes. Actually, it was Michelle Babulis that's really been guiding more of these conversations about
Sorry,
health
Ms.
and safety.
Bavilius, hop
No
in here
worries,
too.
but I've been there. So I think the general rule of thumb to think about is the number of stalls is the number of kids in the bathroom. Managing children in the bathrooms is always a situation in traditional sense. So that's what we've talked about. We've clarified that it is okay for two people to be next to each other at the sinks washing their hands, because it wouldn't be a period of time with exposure, Michelle felt. So as of right now, that's about the depth of the conversations that we've had, what Dan has said and then what I've added. Unless, Joanne, there's some other pieces there that I've left out.
Or Ms. Babilis, you can jump in too.
Sorry, I was just going to address the other side of it, is the cleaning and monitoring of those bathrooms. And we have issued standard operating procedures and the 7-step cleaning process that will be done on all bathrooms, checked hourly by all custodial or staff within the building. And we will have appropriate staffing to do those high-touch white points and door handles. So we will be addressing those every hour with checklists that will be signed off, that we know we've gone into those places and looked at them and cleaned them down and make sure that everything is staying sanitary in there, working with the building administration on that as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Wong. Who's next on my list? Because everybody's off my screen now. Okay, so it looks like Board Member Jacobs, I know you said you were good. I'll just double check back. Did you have any questions or comments that have since come up?
Nope, thank you.
Sounds good. All right, Board Member Delgado, do you have questions or comments at this time?
Yes. One additional question. So I know that with the cohort model, it kind of allows for us to have like around 50% of students in school, like in person, per se. Is there like a specific number where we cannot go above that number in order to follow like the CDC guidelines or health guidelines?
So just as a clarifier, are you asking, is there the ability to go above that 50% and still be within the guidelines?
Correct.
We are self-imposing that 50% cohort model as our reopening plan based on the most recent CDC guidance. If we adopt the metrics that they are saying, we could go above that. We are saying that our plan is not going to go above that. So we built our model, and we've worked hard to establish the groupings so that our transportation and our students coming into the school are maintaining that 50-50 split. Now, is it literally split down the middle exactly to the individual student? It is as close to 50%, so it might be 51-49. In some cases, it got to 50.5 and 49.5. I mean, we did a lot of work trying to get it as close to that 50-50 as possible. But that's a self-imposed metric that we've established as part of our plan.
Thank you for providing that response. And my question to that was because I know that there's other districts that are, fully doing in-person school. So I just wanted to make sure that our community understands that this is a self-imposed, something that is being decided within our district to maintain safety for our students.
Correct.
And staff.
Thank you for that clarification. And I also want to take that opportunity to say that regardless of the, if we move to an in-person model, we are not anticipating coming to the board and making any suggestions for any changes. I know that there's talk about other districts, as you just mentioned, going to a fully in-person. we've been in distance learning, and if we were to move to an in-person, we would stick with this model for the remainder of the year for that full entire term 4, and not ask for any adjustments to the model.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I do have a few more questions, and then I'll bring it back around. So I'm going to take 2 of them and smush them into kind of one. So one kind of very specifically, I appreciate somebody asking the question about, I think it was Amy, about screen time. I have some concerns about our elementary school kids, and I'm wondering if you can give me a sense of the day-to-day in terms of, like, can kids, like, share toys and play together? Like, are there developmentally appropriate ways to keep our young kids in school in a way that kind of satisfies that social emotional piece, like with the sanitization? Could you speak to that?
Certainly,
Thank you.
and I'll allow my team to jump in as well to provide any nuances to my answer. But in terms of our health and safety, we do have wipes that, and we have spray bottles with microfiber cloths to clean any pieces that might be shared. So yeah, the idea that we are providing our students with tools and resources, pens, pencils, papers, toys, books, and so forth that aren't being shared. But if I wanted to share my toy with you, we would wipe it down in between so that we would make sure that we are being clean and healthy, and that's just going to be part of the routine. And again, I know that there's different guidance out there around the levels and how much you need to clean. Again, we built this based on the guidance that our Rock County Health Department has said it's just going to have to look different. So if you and I want to share something in between one another as a kindergartner, we have to know that we're going to have to clean it before I hand it to you, and you'll clean it before you hand it back to me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it actually segues into my kind of second question that I'm smushing in here. So I know that there are already kids being phased in person. I would love to hear it, whether from you or from somebody on your team. Can you give an update on how that's going?
Yes, we've had a few of our schools that have started, and that we have a few more that actually are looking to start this week. From my standpoint, and I'm gonna tap into Miss Beavers, who's been working on this throughout the this distance learning with our special education staff. We've had good success. We've learned a lot. We've in part refined our protocols as a part of these small group interactions, and saying, okay, this is how we had it played out, and now that we have students in there, we've found new refinements that make things better. But Ms. Beavers, you want to talk a little bit about how it's been going with our students with special needs?
Sure, absolutely. So we've actually been bringing individual students and very small groups of students in the building based on individual student needs since September 8th. So we've been doing this for a long time. Obviously, within the first week or two, there were glitches, but in listening to some of the concerns that a lot of you have, they're not concerns that we see on a day-to-day basis, even with some of our most exceptional students. For example, masks, not an issue. Following the directives of the classroom teacher to walk to and from the bathroom, not an issue. We've met often to review and revise the procedures that are in place. And in fact, I believe that's what has been pushed out to building principals to use as procedures as they bring their small groups in. So it's worked very well with us. We haven't had an issue with student screeners. We haven't had an issue with parents filling those out for us. We haven't had issues on the buses. Like I said, there have been small tweaks along the way that we've learned from and made changes to our procedures in response to those. But for the most part, things have been going very well. I don't know if you have specific questions you'd like me to answer, but we've seen great success.
No, I appreciate that very much. I think that, it's been a difficult year, and there have been a lot of, I think, like varying levels of understanding of what's really happening, like with distance learning, what's going on in our buildings. And as we're here tonight to act on reopening, I just wanted to give, our board members and the community some context on the fact that this has been a phased effort and that we've had some kids in. And I'm just genuinely curious I appreciate, it sounds like a very positive outlook for the capability that we have to reopen schools. So that was the nature of my question.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I'm going to go back around if I can find my list here of people. Okay. Board Member Anderson, do you have a question or a comment at this time?
I do not.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Board Member Levy, do you have a question or a comment at this time?
I have a couple, but I will stick to one for now. I know that there have been some concerns with staff and ADA issues, and it was my understanding, please correct me if I have this wrong, that a certain number of staff had approval for ADA, which means that it wasn't safe for them to be in the building with their colleagues. And so now my question is, are those people who had approved ADAs being required to come back into the building with colleagues and up to 50% of our student population? If yes, that is concerning to me. If no, what is the plan to not have staff shortages?
Thank you for the question, Board Member Levy. And so with the ADA, so with our Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA talks about creating reasonable accommodations based on staff member concerns. And so we have a very detailed process, and in a moment I'll turn it over to Ms. Williams to talk a little bit more about the nuances with this. But the important thing to know is this is an interactive conversation, and the interactive nature of that is all determined based on the context. So the context of being able to do the scope of your work while we're in distance learning and all of the students are not in the building is different than doing the scope of your work when some of your students are going to be in the classrooms looking at it. And so looking at the nature of both those pieces governs how we scope that conversation. The important thing is that this is interactive and it's a conversation between the staff member, the administrator, and HR until they come up with a solution that works for everyone. All of our accommodations this year have said that the accommodation is available while we're in the current mode, and if the mode of instruction changes, all ADAs will be reviewed, and that process has been occurring throughout this. Some ADAs have remained the same, others have been tweaked and changed, but again, it's been the conversation that leads to the resolution. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Williams to talk a little bit more about the details.
Thanks, Dr. Keyser. Actually, I think you really did a great job just kind of prefacing, in a sense, our process. We do have a very extensive process, so that way it lends to that interactive process and being collaborative, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is find an accommodation that is reasonable, but also a win-win for both our staff and for the district. So that's where that interactive process comes in, because we don't want to draw like a very hard line in the sand saying that this is unreasonable. We look at everything. We look at one's scope of their role. We look at their essential job functions. We look at what the physical requirements are to do a job. We have a lot of conversations with the employee, the building administrator, and HR. So to Dr. Keyser's point, when we were virtual, we were able to say that working remotely was a reasonable accommodation because we had the tools and the resources to do so. So if if the face-to-face instruction is approved tonight, our job on our team is to reach out to our employees and start having those interactive conversations to determine if a different reasonable accommodation can be put in place for that staff member to do their job safely and effectively.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up, and I completely get that it's a case-by-case basis, but in general, if I am a educator that had concerns, health concerns, either for myself or someone that lived in the home with me, or I was caring for with exposure, et cetera, would it be a reasonable accommodation? And again, I'm just asking you to speak generally, for me to continue to teach from home and there be a substitute in my classroom to kind of monitor the physical classroom, but I would be teaching from a secondary location.
Mm-hmm. So I think with that example, definitely vetting that through legal as well, because with ADA, you want to make sure that it doesn't create an undue hardship on an employer. And so we'd have to look at all of our subbing resources. We'd also have to look to see if there's a fiscal impact to the district as well. But at this time, there's not a decision about, what makes it unreasonable. We need to explore some more about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Levy. Vice President Wong, do you have questions or comments at this time?
Actually, I have one question, but actually it's just a follow-up from Board Member Delgado's question about the percentage. And I'd just like to get an answer on that. Maybe I heard wrong, but didn't you say at the very beginning that 60% of the families indicated that their students would be willing to come back into school?
Based on the most recent survey that we did, and again, not every family filled it out, but that was the breakdown of that.
Okay. Then as a follow-up to that then, what happens if our numbers exceed the 50%? How are we going to handle that?
We built our model based on assuming everyone was going to come back. So we built the model assuming 100% of our students wanted to come back. And so any students who choose to stay in distance learning further reduce that number.
Okay. I'm not taking that as my question. That was just a follow-up to a previous one. But my question is regarding the real young kids, the 4K kids. And I know I've read some stuff about this and I've heard it from other people. And if we're not going to allow for any types of changes in the fourth term, have we given it any thought? Because knowing that the young kids, and I think that there's a lot of proof out there that the young kids are not the super spreaders, and that they definitely are probably the ones that have the greatest amount of gains and losses when it comes to education. Have we given any thought, or have we explored the idea of a full-time 5-day-a-week schedule?
We did explore and contemplate having that when we looked at the totality of what that would do to trying to logistically, we had to keep everyone on one model across their district in order for us to create this plan moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Vice President Wong. And next we have, let's see, I'm just going to skip you, Ms. Jacobs, unless you jump in. Board Member Delgado.
Wait, I do have something, so I am butting in. President Miller, what a surprise.
No, go right ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Kieser, and I know we need to get through this meeting tonight, but if we agree to go back to school fourth quarter, and contingent on what the state and everyone says about summer school, if there is a possibility that we can safely bring kids back full-time, would that be something that could be considered for the catch-up next year?
Are you thinking for summer school or next year, or are you thinking for fourth term?
I'm thinking summer school.
Summer school, we're planning a whole different mindset. We're going at this from the standpoint of trying to have summer school. The outlier right now, not just for us, but for every district, is that DPI last year did a waiver to allow for counting of virtual minutes for reimbursement. They have not given any such clear guidance. So we plan to bring forward our plan for summer school at a later date, but we are looking differently for summer school than we are for fourth term here.
Understood. And I know you had mentioned that earlier. I'm just curious if it is a possibility, would one of those things that you'd be looking at possibly be a full-time?
We have not taken any option off the table. So yes, we are looking at the possibility of doing full summer school. We might not have a choice in that matter. Again, we don't know what the guidance from DPI is going to be, but we are looking at options, and then what we would present to the board is our option that we're going with, and then any alternative options to be considered.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
Board Member Jacobs, I apologize for skipping you over, and I'm so glad that you had the opportunity to bring that up. That's a great question. All right, Board Member.
Good, thank you.
All right, sounds good. Board Member Delgado, do you have questions or comments at this time?
Yes. So you talked a little bit about, and I think it was Ms. Beavers that talked a little bit about the small groups. Are all small groups, or the small groups that are being held or coming to the school, are they from all like school ages, like grades, or is it just specific to the little ones? Or can you give a little bit more information on that?
Sure, absolutely. So it's across the board. I was looking at one for elementary school today, which was every grade level. I've looked at a few from the intermediates. Again, it's about who the schools have identified as being in need. I can tell you that as holistically, and this is a general synopsis of across the plans that I've looked at, it is students who are struggling. Our students are of concern. They're not accessing online learning on a regular basis and need a lot of follow-up. They are students with special needs. They are students who are in need of interventions. Those are in general, the three big groups that I see coming forward as the small group students that schools are wrapping around.
Okay, and those students are being chosen from their individual schools. It's not that parents are asking for this service. It's more of their school identifying the kids. Is that correct?
By and large, yes. Can I say 100% that there aren't families that are calling up and saying, I would like my kid to come to school for some small group support, and that's being looked at? By and large, it is us reaching out to families because we've identified that these are students who are most in need of support. So that's my best answer.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Board Member Delgado. Board Member Anderson, do you have a question or a comment at this time?
I do not.
All right, thank you very much. Board Member Levy, do you have a question or a comment at this time?
I do. I just want to be clear with what the threshold is. It sounds like there won't be a request to return to everyone 5 days a week for term 4. So the max request would be up to 50% of our student population 2 days a week. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So if we do decide to reopen, I would want to be clear about what is the threshold for we need to close. And that would be outside of a staffing issue or a local outbreak that you mentioned. That can be handled separately. So if I'm looking at your metrics, I just want to confirm that the threshold that you are comfortable with using is total new cases per 100,000 persons in the past 7 days, and that's according to DHS. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay, so right now, according to DHS, in the last 7 days, we have a positivity rate for Rock County specifically of 13.71. So that would put us in the moderate transmission or yellow category. Would you still be comfortable with remaining open if we were in the orange category?
I would, based on the CDC guidelines. I've been looking at the school district boundary ones as opposed to the Rock County. So I've been basing it looking at school district specific. So I would say it would be, I'm glad that you asked the question so that we are on the same page as to which metrics we are looking at.
So are you using a different number other than the 13.71? Because that, according to DHS, is for Rock County.
I am on the DHS here. Actually, I will screen share just so that. Share. There we go. So I went to the DHS website and I'm on the COVID-19 Wisconsin summary data page. And then I go to school districts. And I'm going to the Beloit School District. So this is the metric that I would be looking at. And so the last 7 days per 100,000 is 5. That would be my metric that I would be looking at if we want to look at something different. I'm glad that you asked the question so that we can be on the same page.
So my only concern, and I think it may be moot because we would be in the same category, but if you're looking at just the school district boundary, that's far less than 100,000 people.
Yes. But
So according to, and that's fine if you want to use the school district boundary with the 5 people in the past 7 days, but then what color is your cutoff? Is it less than 100, over 100 cases per 100,000 that would give you pause about remaining open? I just really want to be clear on what your threshold is.
So, and that's a great question in terms of, and in part, the question that I would want the board's input on. Based on the CDC guidance, we could with our mitigation measures and their guidance, we could even remain in the hybrid model while we're in the red. So if we were above 100. Your question in terms of would I be comfortable in orange? Yes, I would be comfortable in orange. If the board would say that at red we would revert back to distance learning, CDC's guidance, which I'm putting my thoughts and understanding behind their guidance, we could stay open in red, but if the board felt differently and wanted to put the metric there, that would be where the metric could be.
And thank you for sharing your screen. So here's my question, because I just want to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. Would you be comfortable with going with the Rock County numbers? Because right now the school district, like, it's neat that they have that, but it's 5. Oh, could you go back? But the total, no problem. The total population there is for the population of Rock County. So just for me to keep all things even, I would prefer just using the Rock County data. And if you want to do DHS as opposed to Rock County Public Health Department, I'm completely comfortable with that. So that would be the 13.71, just so we know we're always going back to the same thing. And that would put us at yellow. You are fine with being open in yellow. That seems completely reasonable. So are you asking for the board as a part of our approval this evening to determine where that threshold will be? It sounds like that's what you're saying. And also, is your recommendation that you would be comfortable even if we were at the high transmission level of red, which is anything under 100 cases per 100,000 persons in the past 7 days?
Just so that I make sure that I call that. And then I'll have one clarifier. So am I comfortable with using the Rock County DHS metric and staying in virtual up through orange and then transitioning to distance when we hit the high transmission threshold? Is that what you're asking?
Close, but not exactly.
Okay.
So if we could separate it out. So one, are you comfortable with using, and it's all DHS?
Yep.
Since that seems to be your preference, I'm fine with that. The Rock County data, not the school district data.
I
so
think
the 13.71 cases per 100,000 in the last 7 days. Is that something you would be agreeable to using?
actually, just to clarify that it isn't 13.71, it's actually 8.5. The rate for the last 7 days is the top paragraph. The 13.71 is the average number of cases over the last 7 days. So there's an average number of confirmed cases over the last 7 days of 13 cases per day. So the rate per 100,000 is actually 8.5 on the Rock County. I personally think the school district of Beloit is a better metric because it represents the 38,000 families that feed into the school district boundaries. It's a little bit more personalized, but as far as Rock County, it incorporates and encapsulates any open enroll students who may be coming from Turner or Clinton or Janesville. I could go with Rock County over the school district. I think the school district gives us better data because it's within our school district boundaries. But I understand where your logic is at.
No, and actually that's fine. And you kind of spoke to having a dashboard.
Yep.
As long as, and I'm fine with going with the school district number, as long as that number is readily available and published on the dashboard. Is that something that your team would be willing to do?
I will make sure that number gets updated on the dashboard because we can pull this data and we can actually provide a link directly to this screen on our webpage so people can look it up as well.
Perfect. So currently with using that number, we're in the low transmission or blue.
Correct.
Is it accurate to say that you are comfortable with us remaining open if we decide to open up through high transmission, and that would be a classification of red?
Correct. Yes, I am comfortable with that.
Okay. So I guess my final question is, at what point would you no longer be comfortable with remaining open? What would that threshold of cases be? And if you want to give it some thought and get back to me, that's completely fine as well.
I appreciate that. I think I will take some time to think through that question. Yes.
This evening, though, would be great. But yeah, just.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I get
Thank you.
that. Yes.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. All right. Let's see. Vice President Wong, do you have a question or a comment at this time?
I have another question. And I was kind of going through the whole presentation, and I thought maybe I missed something on this, but I don't think I did. And it's a dual question. I'm assuming that the schedule is the same as what it has been for what a normal school year would be. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And with that, this ties into the busing. And if we're, are we confident that with the numbers, we're going to be able to, with only 24 kids on a bus, have enough buses and then get the kids there in a timely fashion for those schools that, I guess one that comes to mind is Fruzen, because we have a lot of buses and you really can't, it's not easily walkable.
Correct. And I can have Ms. Armstrong jump in on the nuances, but based on doing the cohort model, that's in part how we were able to say we could keep our start and end times the same, is because we're only going to be transporting half the students. And we've also reached out, as Board Member Levy had talked about, to families and encourage self-transport.
So the schedule of the day is going to be roughly start at 8-ish and then ending at 3:30-ish, in that range?
Correct. Ms. Armstrong, is there any differences with those?
Yeah, those are the rough starts. In the family handbook, it states those beginning and end times, and they have been accommodating the breakfast, being able to come in and have breakfast. We did work with all the schools to make sure that we needed those parameters. Start and end times had to stay the same, so that because we're in a tiered busing model with intermediates and elementary, we needed to have those consistent. And what I asked our transportation vendor to create is, with our 50% capacity, and as we looked at our cohorts and our groupings, was it feasible for this? And we are capable of transporting the 50%, keeping their times and not having people on buses for 4 and 6 hours, not even 2 hours, but being able to do that reasonably within normal time frames, but also highly encouraging self-transport when possible, as that will help speed up some of those opportunities. But we would be able to transport all 50% that are eligible for transportation timely and safely.
Great. I would highly recommend that for every school, because I believe there's a website for each school, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I would highly recommend to keep the communications wide open, but make sure the start and end times are publicized on all their websites so that people are fully aware of that. The last thing we want to do is lack of communication and people confused as far as start and end times.
Nope. And then I was taking my look through the booklet real quick with their start and end times. I know it is in our group for the handbook. I just can't put my fingers on it right this second, but I can come back to it.
I have it here. So let me share my screen quick. So this is the Term 4 guide, and so there's our start. These are our start and end times.
Yes, I just found that as well. So that's in our family guide, and we can obviously post those as well out at the building level.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Vice President Wong. Did you have any other follow-ups, or are you good?
Nope, that's good for now.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Board Member Jacobs, do you have a question or comment at this time?
Thank you for asking, but I'm good, thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you. Board Member Delgado, do you have a question or a comment at this time?
Yes. So going off on Board Member Levy's question regarding, like, if there's like a set number where we would, like a threshold where, we would just say, we can continue to have schools open. Would it be, I don't know, maybe a different avenue to go by outbreaks, like, because I can see what you're saying that, because we're going to be like no more of a 50% of students in schools, we can pretty much have any threshold as long as there's no outbreaks. But if there was to be like, continuously outbreaks, where would you stop? Where would you say, we definitely can have schools open?
So thank you for bringing back the question, because I had been thinking about the upper threshold for that Board Member Levy had asked, and looking at the way the CDC laid out their guidance, with the exception of low being an interval of 10, the other ones were intervals of 50. So to me, I would say using that same mathematical reference, I would say below 150. If we hit 150 and higher, I would recommend that we transition to distance learning. But to your question, Board Member Delgado, the decision around opening and closing of schools is not one that is always able to just be, it's this, and then it's this. There are some situations in which we can make those, but you're absolutely right. If we find ourselves that we are having a rash of localized outbreaks, then that would be something that I would look at with the team and say, we need to do a reset of the district. And if we were to reopen and then have to go back and reclose the district again, I would probably be coming before the board and say, we did this and we had X, Y, and Z, and I ended up in closing and switching the entire district. And when we reopened, we went right back into it. In that situation, I would come back before the board and say, this is the decision that I think we need to do moving forward. And then get feedback from the board as I've done in the past. But that would be the way that I would handle the scenario that you just posed to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Delgado. All right, so I'm trying to figure out how I squish questions together. Okay, I have a general question. I guess I'll just make a comment and follow it up with a question. So certainly with our plan here, it's been very thorough, and I appreciate that. And as you mentioned before, when we were talking about how we've got some kids in person now, and that's helped kind of tweak and inform how we move forward. I know that it is barely March here. It's March 1st. So I guess I want to be clear that when we take action on this item, that there's an understanding that there's going to be wiggle room for individual teacher issues and flexibility. For example, I know that we have like CTE instructors that might have specific concerns about how safety protocols translate to, wise use of instructional time, for example. Like, is there, so I guess my first question about that would just be, is there wiggle room then for those instructors to work through those issues with their principals and with central office staff, if applicable?
Yes, absolutely. So you pose a question about if a teacher finds a way that would better support the health and safety of the students in their class and themselves by proposing a protocol for their classroom.
Or like to follow the safety protocols, but like optimize instructional time.
Correct. So finding optimizations within our health and safety protocols as well as instruction. Absolutely. If in part that is what Ms. Beavers was talking about in terms of we've learned things along the way. And I would say that we've actually already started to have those conversations in areas of like music and things that they've shared. So yes, there is the ability that staff can reach out and work with their administration if they find ways that would optimize the work within the building. We're open to those conversations.
I appreciate that. And then in the spirit of optimizing instructional time, there have been a lot of concerns that we've heard from certainly not all, but some people have raised the point that they're concerned about like some learning loss from this year, which of course is going to be a statewide issue regardless of school district. However, I'm thinking about our substitute teacher situation. If we have a situation where a teacher has to quarantine because maybe they're a close contact or something, but they're not like ill. So this is just something I've seen happen in other districts, and I would like, maybe you could speak to that and give us some more information. So if, let's say I'm a teacher and I'm quarantined and there's a sub in my classroom, is there a policy or a barrier in place that would prevent me from, given that the sub is there, because of course you have to have somebody there in person, is there any reason why somebody couldn't from home on quarantine provide some instruction? The reason that I ask this is that when we have subs in the classroom, regardless of how phenomenal our substitutes are, and many of them are wonderful, I guess there's still some learning loss, there's some adjustment, and just in the spirit of that optimized instruction, could you speak a little to like kind of is how that's on our radar now? I know it's probably not all the way.
It's on our radar, and in part it goes back to the question that Ms. Williams was talking about in terms of leaves versus accommodations. When a staff member is on a leave, by law they can engage in instruction. But if a staff member is out, and we have a sub in the classroom and they're able to fulfill their job duties, we definitely look at those options as an opportunity to keep the learning moving forward.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I spent a lot of time as a sub before as a teacher, and I thought I was a pretty good sub, but it's still always better to have that extra expertise right in the room. So I just lost my questions, and I guess the last thing I'm going to sneak in here, because then I think I'm done. Okay, I just am thinking about the quality then of instruction, again, kind of the same spirit of optimizing instructional time and like adjustment for our kids, and we've addressed a little bit of like the social emotional learning with our younger kids, and we just talked a lot about optimizing circumstances. So I saw that on March, I think is it the 24th and 25th, there's going to be like a family kind of orientation. What types of supports do we have in our buildings to support our teachers, our support staff, folks who work in our buildings to help onboard students into those routines just to make the transition as smooth as possible so kids, I imagine we'll have a lot of kids really excited to be back. Some kids might be really scared. There's probably an across the gambit set of experiences that students might bring into a building with them. So can you talk a little bit about what supports are existing right now and what you anticipate will be there for kids to kind of transition in?
Yes, in part, we're looking at the potential of moving to in-person as like September 1 starting in April or on April 8th. So yes, there's absolutely the conversation with the administrators and at the building level around what would this start to an in-person look like. In part, we've heard conversations from staff saying, well, if they're going to be in for 2 days and then distance for 2 days, and we're going to have to be working on social emotional routines and stuff like that. Absolutely, that's a part of learning, and so we have to honor and recognize that the social emotional learning that's going to occur in person is a part of learning. Is it different from the academic learning? Absolutely. And we have to help support our staff and our administrators in having those conversations and planning for the students that they know are coming in. In part, if we approve an in-person plan, we do have planned 2 days for staff to solely work, no PD, nothing other than preparing for students coming in, so that we give due time and effort to not only preparing the physical environment to receive students. And in part, a lot of that's been going on right now in anticipation, but also to plan for the supports that are going to be needed for when the students physically show up in the building.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for entertaining my questions there. Looking back, then, Board Member Anderson, do you have a question or comment at this time?
I am good.
Thank you. Board Member Levy.
I do. So a comment and a question. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I think we brought up an interesting point about if a student or a teacher feels well but is quarantining and still able to teach. Again, don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I am hopeful that if that teacher is teaching from home while quarantined, that doesn't count against a sick day that they need to use since they're engaging in their job. So that's my comment. My question is, what protocols are being put into place for high traffic, unavoidable instances? For example, arrivals and dismissals. If we have our students back in our buildings, I'm assuming that we're going to have to do that required once a month fire drill. What does that look like? And then, God forbid, if there is a community threat that impacts one or more of our schools, what does lockdown look like in our COVID situation? So has thought been given to those high traffic situations and what safety precautions are being put in place?
And I'll try to address each one individually, starting with pickup drop-off. So we've been working with buildings and saying, and even in part, we've been doing this in planning for small group instruction, having separate doors for different groups. So utilizing our entrance and exits so that we can to minimize those high traffic places. So if approved for in-person, each school is working with their staff to say, okay, how are we going to enter in kids so that we minimize the number of students coming in, and looking at that. In part, schools that are doing small group instruction are already well on their way for that type of planning, because they've already started to say, okay, these 2 kids are coming in this classroom because if we're in person, that's the door they're going to come in when they're in person, and so on. So that's how we would address those high traffic pieces. Yes, the fire drills are things that we would need to practice on a monthly basis, but we know, and the city knows, that this is COVID, and that this isn't a speed drill. This is one that we take our due diligence and take our time so that we can do it safely, and still while it's a practice, do it in a way that honors our health and safety guidelines. If for some reason there's a fire, there is a situation where we have to do a hard lockdown, that's health and safety as well, and we do what we need to do to keep our kiddos safe. And so, if there was a fire and the fire alarm had to go, that's why we practice, and we would do it in an orderly but quickly fashion so that we can get our students out, space them apart so that we can get there. If it's a lockdown and we have to put into our protocols to sequester in place, we're going to do that and do, again, if we can do it and social distance, great, but our ultimate safety is the livelihood of our students, and we're going to do what we need to protect them in that particular situation.
And I apologize, I left off a very important one. What does recess look like?
Yes, so recess is definitely something that we've talked about, and so it looks a little bit different for each of the buildings because they're slightly different. But the guidance that Ms. Beloit has been talking through with principals has been exactly about trying to separate out groups and having groups go out at different times. So it's not that it's this mass group that all goes out, but actually trying to space them out, it's going to look different. It's certainly going to feel different. But again, what we know about the guidance that's been given to us by the health departments, both at the state and local level, is that when they're outside, that the outside air is actually a good deterrent for that transmission rate. Ms. Beloit, do you want to talk? I did a high-level summary. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the nuances?
Yeah, so in regards to recess, I mean, you explained it pretty well. We talked to principals about setting up zones for different classes for those students that don't usually intermingle. So for K through 5th grade, they usually don't switch to different classrooms and intermingle. They usually stay with the same group of students throughout the day. So those students will kind of have different zones out on the playground, and throughout the week they'll switch which zone they're in. So that way, like if we do need to make contact tracing, those students who usually don't remember who their friends are or their names that their friends are when they're playing outside for recess, we won't have to worry about that because we already know who is in their class, and we would do contact tracing with their classmates at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Levy. Vice President Wong, do you have a comment or a question at this time?
Yeah, I want to bring up or talk about something that was discussed before. You had mentioned in your presentation that all the Chromebooks, the 1,600 Chromebooks had been delivered in, and that there was plenty of chargers and all of that for the iPads or the dying iPads that we've had in the district. What about staff? What about the technology for staff as well? Are we up to date on that to the point whereby we're not going to have to worry about staff members being handicapped in any way, shape, or form due to lack of technology?
So each of our staff have MacBooks. They've also been issued a second device for the simulcasting, but as part of earlier purchase that we've done, all of our staff will be receiving by next fall a Chromebook in addition to their MacBook. So for 4th term, they do have a second device. If that device is giving them problems, they let us know so that we can swap it out. Some are using Chromebooks, some are using iPads, but they do have a second device that should not handicap them. And they've been working with that since we started the PD for the simulcasting when we came back from winter break.
So if there's any problems, they have ample time, a full month before, to let anybody know if they have a problem before we go live, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Vice President Wong. All right, Board Member Jacobs.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Board Member Delgado.
I am good, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm good. Board Member Anderson, I'm going to go one last round around here.
I am good.
Thank you much. Board Member Levy.
I am good for my reopening questions. I don't know if this is the appropriate time or not, but I did have some concerns with our reopening policy because it is referenced. So I can hold off on that if other people still have reopening questions.
All right, thanks. I'll come back to you. Board Member Wong.
I'm good.
All right. So somebody jump in before I go back to Board Member Levy. Are we good? Okay, hearing none. Go ahead.
All right. So we've been having this conversation since July. In November, we did unanimously make the decision to change that first line of the reopening policy, which is 723.41. But what we didn't do was make everything else in the policy congruent. For example, the first sentence says that it's the board's decision, and I'm paraphrasing, the superintendent will present, the board will approve, etc. But then when we go down to like the 4th section, it says that it's the superintendent's decision whether we will reopen. My point is, one, the current policy contradicts itself. And I know that Dr. Kieser had asked to have the ability to close schools as needed and to reopen if it was because of local outbreak or staffing. And really, I think that should be handled in policy 723.41 rule 1. Now, the issue was when we looked at policy 723.41, the only thing we changed was that top sentence. We did not make the whole policy match. And I thought the policy and the rule was going to come back to policy and personnel. The only thing that came back to policy and personnel was rule 1 of said policy. And Dr. Kieser recommended that we didn't need rule 1, so it died in committee. So all of that to say this. 1, policy 723.41 needs to be reconstructed or edited in a way where it doesn't contradict itself. And the thing that Dr. Kieser is asking for, which I think is appropriate, in my opinion, should be handled in Rule 1 of that policy. And it sounds like we probably have a month to get that cleared up. That is my recommendation.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. Dr. Kieser, did you want to speak to that at all?
I definitely will reread 423.41, the conversation around that first one where it's the superintendent will bring a plan, the board will approve. Definitely can bring that back to with suggested formatting so that it reads congruent. The reason why I felt that the Rule 1 didn't need to be there was that a plan should include, within the recommendation, those limitation or those authorities that the administration is recommending for the board to consider. I understand what you're saying, Board Member Levy, in that if every time we have a health crisis, these would be the situations in which the superintendent should have the authority to open. Not every health crisis may be due to a pandemic that has localized outbreaks. So that's why I felt having a Rule 1 governed based on our current situation may not hopefully will not see itself again for another 100 years, in which case, if we're all here 100 years from now, we have a different conversation to have. But that being said, the plan is more adaptive to the health crisis that's in front of us. And so having the recommendation of administration superintendent's authority within the plan makes it a much more proactive approach as opposed to having something that may not be pertinent for the next health crisis if we have one in the future.
And I see Board Member Jacobs has her hand up, so I'll be really brief. I think the same thing, but from the opposite end of the coin. If we went through the trouble of creating a policy specifically for a public health crisis, which we're currently experiencing, I am more comfortable than outlining the authorities that you wish to have with reopening under that limited ability in Rule 1. I'm not comfortable with us creating a policy and then having exceptions to a new policy. From my perspective, that speaks to a poorly written policy if you need to immediately make exceptions for it. And I would be more comfortable handling what you're asking for in Rule 1 of that policy.
I can understand where you're coming from, and if the board would like us to reconsider the creating a Rule 1, then it would be, that recommendation can be moved to the policy committee to take up again.
Thank you very much. Board Member Jacobs?
Just a point of order. Was this on the agenda to discuss the policy? I'm just wanting us to keep on track with the reopening of the school.
Thank you so much, Board Member Jacobs. I'm so sorry, Board Member Levy. I was just going to say the question came from part of the proposal for the reopening plan, but your point is well taken. And I do just, speaking of which, and I was curious about your question mark too. It's a special board meeting, so the one rule that says we only have the 2 hours doesn't apply. So just in case anybody's wondering, we don't have to do the motion to extend or anything like that. So, Board Member Jacobs, does that answer your question or address your concern?
I'm not sure. I just want to make sure that we're staying on topic, and are we?
I believe so. It's in the reopening plan that Dr. Kieser put forward, and I see Dr. Kieser nodding. So, but I do really appreciate that because it's important for us to stay on the agenda for sure. Thank you.
Yes, I had referenced the policy as part of the presentation, answering a couple of the questions.
Are there any other questions or comments at this time? Hearing none, I will take a motion at this time if we are ready to take action on the plan.
I move approval of the reopening plan and shift to an in-person instruction cohort model beginning April 8th, 2021, and grant the superintendent the authority to reopen schools for the district following a closure due to localized outbreak or staffing situation.
I have a friendly amendment before you acknowledge a second, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One, I would like to separate the additional authorities because I would like that handled through policy that we just referenced. And two, I would like for a threshold to be included. And I'm open to the verbiage, but something up to and remain open until the point of high transmission is reached. And that doesn't necessarily mean close, but it does. I think that should be a red flag that the board revisits. Because at that point, I would want to look at additional things like what is hospital capacity, what does the landscape of the community look like? Is it viable for us to remain open even as we approach high transmission, which I hope we don't reach, or is it something that we need to consider returning to distance learning?
Thank you very much. So at this time, I want to, I was looking at policy for a moment, so I have to go back to the language that was recommended. So it sounds like the recommendation is to amend the motion to say, hold on just a second. I didn't type out everything. Here it is. So are we looking for something like move approval of the reopening plan and shift to an in-person instruction cohort model beginning April 8th, 2021? With regard to, I keep missing your language, Board Member Levy. The high, can you say that again, your threshold language?
Yeah, and I didn't have any formalized, so you didn't miss anything. So let's do that now. So move approval of the reopening plan to shift to in-person instruction cohort model beginning April 8th, 2021. As long as we haven't reached a high transmission threshold. And then I think that can streamline the language, but it refers back to Dr. Kieser's plan and DHS, et cetera. So as long as we haven't reached a high transmission threshold, and then that second part, I would like to do that separately. I don't want that in the main motion because I think that any additional authorities should be processed through the policy, not through a motion.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that back and make sure that Board Member Delgado, make sure that works. So the proposal to amend what your motion was will be to remove the second half, vote on and do that separately in policy. And it would read, and I just moved the screen again. So it would read something like, move approval of the reopening plan and shift to an in-person instruction cohort model beginning April 8th, 2021, as long as we haven't reached a high transmission threshold. Board Member Delgado, is that an amendment that you're willing to accept to your motion?
I'm okay with that as long as that authority is granted before we actually reopen the schools, because that is something that Dr. Kieser will need, or at least to be sure that that's granted or how that's going to be handled.
So how about before we take a second on that, if it's okay, Dr. Kieser, do you want to speak to that? Are you confident that we can get that policy piece handled so we can safely take out the second part of that motion?
I feel that the plan should include the authorities that are asked. I think the spirit of the policy, the what of the policy, is that the board has, in a health crisis, the board has the authority to reopen buildings once they are closed, and that the authority should be a part of that overall plan. As far as the first, so I would say that I would like to keep that in the motion. And as far as Board Member Levy's question about the board revisiting the plan when we reach a high transmission rate, I think is appropriate based on the conversation that we've had.
Okay, so go ahead, Board Member Levy. Yep.
Thank you. Then I would request that we do two separate motions because I can support the first one. I can't support the second one. So just move things along. If we could separate out the motions, if Dr. Kieser feels strongly that he doesn't want to go through policy and personnel, he wants it in the plan, I would need those separate.
Okay, so, go ahead, Dr. Kieser, yeah.
No, I think that's the most appropriate, because then the board can decide if it wants to go through policy or if it wants to be a part of the plan.
Sounds good. So Board Member, okay, go ahead.
You know, on my question mark, President Miller?
I did not, and so I apologize. Go right ahead.
Okay, no problem. So I'm a little confused. I liked Board Member Delgado's original motion. I understand that Board Member Levy made the friendly amendment. So do we need to go ahead then, and where are we at? Because is this time for questions or discussions, or?
That's fine. What I was going to do is read back the recommendation that Dr. Kieser made back to Board Member Delgado, since she made the original motion, and ask if it was okay to say, if I may, the original motion language, including Board Member Levy's language about as long as we haven't reached a high transmission threshold, and then just to leave it there so that we could separate the motion into two parts, which is what it sounds like there's some consensus between Dr. Kieser and Board Member Levy. Board Member Jacobs, do you have questions about that?
Well, yes, because I guess I'd like the rest of the board to weigh in as well. And what is high transmission? Is that the red zone?
Yes, that would be the red zone. So that would be once we hit a threshold of over 100 cases per 100,000 over a 7-day average.
Okay. Is it appropriate? Thank you, Dr. Kieser. Is it appropriate to have the other board members weigh in at this time on the original motion, Maria?
Yeah,
sorry.
no, that's fine. I was actually, that's fine. I saw Board Member Anderson as a question mark, but if it's okay, I just kind of want to ask Board Member Delgado, like, where she's at, since it was her motion language. So I just want to kind of quick check back with Board Member Delgado, make sure we all know what we're talking about and which language we're talking about, and then I'm going to take a question for Board Member Anderson, and so far no one has seconded either amendment or motion. So Board Member Delgado, go ahead.
I am okay doing a motion with the first part, including the threshold, and then doing a second motion. I think that's fair. Doing a second motion for granting the superintendent the authority to reopen schools in the district, because at that time, other board members can also vote and weigh in on that.
Perfect. And so what I would just say then, before we take any other questions or comments, if somebody would second that, we can open that up for discussion, and then we have the option to pass or fail that motion, which is, I'll just repeat for us, if that's okay. The motion that is awaiting a second that's on the table that has been friendly amended by Board Member Levy is to move approval of the reopening plan and shift to an in-person instruction cohort model beginning April 8th, 2021, as long as we haven't reached a high transmission threshold. So is there a second for that amended motion?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, now Board Member Anderson, I'm going to go to you first, and then Board Member Jacobs, if you have any follow-ups, go for it. Board Member Anderson?
The question I had was, could we put for giving Dr. Kieser the authority to open and close schools as a until a policy is written that says otherwise. I mean, I don't know how practical that is.
I think that's something that we can talk. Let's put a pin in that for a moment. Let's vote on this. I appreciate that suggestion. So let's vote first on that first language that Board Member Delgado put forward and was seconded. And then when we come back for the second part, because I think it sounds like we have consensus from Dr. Kieser as well around splitting the motion into two, we can talk about that language. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Board Member Jacobs.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Board Member Anderson.
It's fine.
So then the second motion that we're going to discuss is what then?
It sounds like the second motion would have to do with, I'll just read the language for you, and grant the superintendent, no problem. It would be to grant the superintendent the authority to reopen schools or the district following a closure due to a localized outbreak or staffing situation.
Point of order, can we keep discussion to the motion that's on the floor, please?
Absolutely. Board Member Jacobs, are you clear on the motion that is currently on the table that has been seconded? Is right now we would be voting yes or no to approve the reopening plan and shift to an in-person instruction cohort model beginning April 8th, 2021. And I keep losing my language here, sorry. As long as we haven't reached a high transmission threshold. So that's the motion that's been seconded.
Okay, and thank you. And with all due respect, Board Member Levy, I was just still trying to figure out why it kind of did go together, because I was trying to figure out why I still am not quite sure why we're separating them, but I can live with it.
No, I appreciate that. At this time, are there other questions or discussion on the motion that's on the table?
Can we have a roll call vote, please?
We certainly may. Are there any other questions or discussion at this time for the motion that's on the table? All right, hearing none. Ms. Shope, whenever you're ready, we can have a roll call vote. Thanks.
Levy.
Aye.
Jacobs.
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Wong.
Aye.
Delgado.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Motion carried unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. So at this time, Board Member Anderson, did you have some thoughts on language that you would like to include? And just to clarify, and I appreciate that that was confusing because we kind of shifted from what the recommended action was, so thanks everybody for our patience here. So Board Member Anderson, currently the second part of the recommended language reads, grant the superintendent the authority to reopen schools or the district following a closure due to a localized outbreak or staffing situation. Did you have recommended language that you wanted to include?
My thought is we put some kind of language in there saying until policy, I'm drawing a blank on what it is, but until policy, whatever policy it is updated to reflect the opening and closure of our school district.
So to be clear, the purpose of the language that you'd want to include, it would be like we would be taking action to give that power, and then until the point at which the policy is amended, and then the motion would no longer be necessary. It would just be part of policy. Am I understanding correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have thoughts on language or would like to make a motion for the second part? Board Member Levy, go ahead, please.
No.
Oh, and then Board Member Jacobs, I can get you next.
It seems to me that authorities granted can either be done through a motion or through policy. And I'm a little biased here, but the Policy and Personnel Committee has been doing a really nice job of getting through policy on our agenda. So it is a viable option. I don't think we need the stopgap until policy is done. We can either decide that it's appropriate to grant these authorities through a motion, or it's appropriate to grant these authorities through policy. I don't think we need the stopgap until we get to policy.
Thank you very much. Board Member Jacobs?
I'm pondering what Board Member Levy just said now. Thank you.
No, that's fine. Dr. Kieser, did you want to jump in?
My only concern with a stopgap would be, I don't disagree with Board Member Levy that the committee's been doing a good job of getting through the policy. If we do not bring a policy through committee to the March 9th board meeting, it will not make the two meeting requirement before in-person instruction gets started. And so there would be a small window, small as it might be, where there would be, the only policy guidance would be that if I had to close the school, the board is the only authority that can reopen the school because we are in a health crisis. So the stopgap would be, if the school were to go into, a school would go into a localized outbreak that first week. Let's hope that it never happens. But if it did, the only authority to grant a reopening under policy, which is the 423.41, would be the school board. And so we would have to call a school board meeting to get that authority.
Thank you very much for clarifying. Board Member Delgado?
Okay, I'm just trying to understand Board Member Levy's point as far as, I don't know, to me this is pretty clear, that we do need to grant an authority. But as far as the policy, what part of, if we grant the authority right now, we can always go back to policy and change that. Is that correct?
Are you asking me?
Whoever would like to answer.
Oh, okay, sure. Yes, that is correct, but it's messy. And I don't want us to spend any more time being messy. I want us to be clear and intentional with our actions. And one, I would just push back slightly. The way policy 723.41 is currently constructed, it would be up for debate as to who does what. Because remember, when this policy came before the full board in November, the only thing we changed was that first sentence. So as the policy, the active policy stands, it contradicts itself. So the policy needs to be addressed, period. So it's really like a foundational question. Do you think that decisions should be made through policy or through motion? I happen to think it should be made through policy, but if anyone differs, that's completely fine. It's just how you think the matters of the board should be handled.
Thank you, Board Member Levy. I would like to put in a motion, if that's okay, or unless there's any other discussion that needs to be made.
I mean, you can make a motion and we can still have questions or discussion. I was just gonna, and I'm not sure, I saw Dr. Kieser do his mic, so I think he might have had a comment. And I was just gonna share the policy so we could just take a quick look at it. But Board Member Delgado, do you wanna let Dr. Kieser weigh in real quick before we make a motion?
Sure.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add on to Board Member Levy's comments in terms of I believe that and reading through, I'll reread through the policy because I don't disagree with you that there may be contradictions or are contradictions in the policy that need to be cleaned up. I feel that from the same belief, other side of the coin, that once this pandemic's over, there won't be a need for the authority, because the authorities around closing for winter weather and all those things are already delineated in policy, and there is a common belief that in a health crisis we've come to consensus, and why we are doing the plan, that the board is the authority for reopening during a health crisis, and I'm asking for specific authority up front to say, in these two options, if the board believes that I should have that authority, it's only these two, and for this plan. If we were coming up with a whole different plan with a whole different set of circumstances, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. And to your side perspective, Board Member Levy, having it in policy may or may not delineate each and every health crisis that we might come across, and so that authority written in policy, I feel, could actually end up creating an undue barrier to dealing with a situation in the future, as opposed to having the policy that would allow us to be more proactive in dealing with the situation right in front of us. So that's just where my perspective is at.
So Board Member Jacobs had a question, and then we're going to go, it looks like Board Member Levy is next. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that I will wait on what I'm going to say. I'd like to hear what Board Member Levy says, and then I'd like to hear what Board Member Delgado's motion would be.
All right, Board Member Delgado, are you okay with me going back into, I should have asked before I call in Board Member Jacobs. Are you good with us continuing discussion at this point?
That's fine.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to let Board Member Levy respond. I'm going to come back to you for your motion. Does that sound good?
As long as you come back to me, I'm okay with that.
Sounds good. All right, thank you. Board Member Levy, sorry for the delay. Go ahead.
No problem at all. So my only concern is that I'm a firm believer that boards should follow policy, and I completely agree with what you're requesting, Dr. Kieser. I just think it's most appropriately handled in Policy 723.41, Rule 1. And I don't think we should have to come up with every conceivable possibility that might come up in a pandemic, but to address the two authorities that you're requesting, which I think are very reasonable, I just believe that the most appropriate place to put those are in Rule 1 of the policy that we've already established, because that was the reason we established the policy, was to handle reopening in a public health crisis. So if we're not going to use the policy while we're in the health crisis now, for me, it makes no sense to even have it.
Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. Did you want to respond, Dr. Kieser? And then we'll go to Board Member Delgado.
No, I totally understand your perspective. I'm thinking of the what, and I know you are as well, and that's why I feel it's appropriate that we're having this discussion, so the board can make that determination of which direction to go.
Thank you so much. Board Member Delgado.
I would like to make a motion to grant the superintendent the authority to reopen schools or the district following a closure due to a localized outbreak or staffing situation due to the pandemic.
Thank you. Is there a second or an amendment to that motion?
I second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second to grant the superintendent the authority to reopen schools. Yeah, I just lost sorry, I'm in policy again, so let me just make sure I have the motion language right here. So we have a motion and a second to grant the superintendent, the authority to reopen schools or the district following a closure due to a localized outbreak or staffing situation. Is there any additional discussion at this time or questions?
Please don't forget due to the pandemic in there.
Sounds good. Do you want to read it back or let me just check with Ms. Shope. Ms. Shope, do you have the motion? Okay, Ms. Shope's nodding that she's got it in there, so I apologize for overlooking that word for you, but it looks like we've got it down. Other questions or discussion at this time?
I threw a question mark out, President Miller.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Board Member Levy, I absolutely agree with you about the policy piece. The reason I think we do need to clean that up. But I think I'm also taking into consideration what Superintendent Kieser said with the tight time frame we're dealing with right now. And that's why I did the second to Board Member Delgado's motion. But I still do believe we need to go, that needs to be put on our next policy meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me actually check the chat. Oh, go ahead, Board Member Levy.
No, I just want to request a roll call vote, please.
No problem. At this time, are there other questions or I do have a question, but does anybody else have a question or discussion item at this time? Okay, just really quick, because I just want to be clear. So Dr. Kieser, it sounds like in the event that we prioritized that policy and it went through that window, right? So if we got it on the policy agenda, I want to make sure I get my dates right. And it passed first reading March 9th, and it passed the second reading the second, I can't think really quick what that date is, but the following board business meeting?
23rd.
The 23rd. Okay, oh yeah, duh, because February and March are the same. Okay, cool. So the 23rd. So if that were, let's say it goes back to policy, it passes, but then there's some kind of a holdup. Is there anything stopping us from making the same motion on the 23rd that would still give you that? I guess, is there a detriment to making the attempt to do it through policy? Like, does that put us at any additional risk? Or, because it sounds to me like it's the same outcome, and we're choosing one road or the other, which is of course fine. And I just want to make sure I fully understand what the implications are of picking one road or the other.
And I'm reflecting on exactly that one. So if this motion passes and we still do the policy work, it's a moot point.
Right.
If the motion fails and we do the work, it's a moot point. It's only in the situation that the motion fails and we don't get the work and something were to happen after April 8th.
Gotcha. So as long as we have the fail-safe of however the board moves right now, as long as on the 23rd, either a motion passes or the policy second read passes, we're good.
If the motion were to fail tonight, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much for clarifying that. Okay, Board Member Jacobs, is that your same question mark from before?
Yeah, I don't have anything to thank you.
All right, sounds good. All right, last call for questions or discussion before we take our roll call vote. All right, Ms. Shope, whenever you're ready, please.
Jacobs.
I know that's not the right answer. One moment. I'm understanding everything. I'm going to say nay.
Wong.
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Delgado.
Aye.
Levy.
Nay.
Miller.
Nay. So is that 3-3? Okay,
Motion failed.
So the motion fails. So what that means is that it would go then back to the Policy and Personnel Committee, so hopefully prioritized. And then as long as it passes second reading the 23rd, we are good to go. If there's some error in that, board members, we need to be prepared to make a motion and delegate the authority by motion then on the 23rd of March. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
I guess I do. So there were 3 ayes and 3 nays?
Correct, yeah, so a tie fails.
Correct.
Is it a tie?
Nope. Tie on a motion means the motion fails.
Oh, okay. I just learned another Roberts rule. Lovely.
That is okay. So, all right, so it sounds like we have We have passed our, oh, go ahead, our Vice President Wong. We're going to come back to Vice President Wong. I was just going to summarize. I'm kind of a summarizer. So just to summarize, we have passed the reopening plan that was proposed by Dr. Kieser. We have addressed the policy issue, and if it needs to be readdressed, it'll come back on the 23rd. Go ahead.
So we're going to have to, I mean, we're not going to have 30 days, right? We're going to need to waive policy?
No, because policy was already changed for policy creation, that it has to be 2 consecutive board meetings.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
That is an excellent clarification, though. Thank you for bringing that up. For sure. Okay, it looks like, let me make sure I didn't clear the chat by accident. Okay, it looks like we're good with the chat. Does anybody else have a question or a comment about any of the action taken this evening? All right, exciting night. Hearing none. I will take a motion to adjourn at this time unless there's any other business.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Have a fabulous evening. Thanks, everybody.